Layout Builder. My name is NathanDentzau. I'm a senior software engineer at General Assembly, online education company for software engineers and data scientists. But primarily, let's focus on here. I didn't put like a title slide about myself because it should just be about the presentation here. So here's some deliverables from the talk today. I want to make sure that everybody walking out of here has an understanding about how Layout Builder works. Not from a functional perspective, but from a programmatic perspective of what's actually happening underneath the hood. We're going to have a high-level understanding of the Plugin API, Block API, and Layout API. We're going to learn an object-oriented way to approach Layout Builder in your own module or your own site. And at the end, if we have enough time, we're going to learn how to hack Layout Builder. And I take no responsibility to break your site, but not going to do anything too fancy. We're going to swap out some major functionality with Layout Builder using some object-oriented principles. So first, what is Layout Builder? So last summer, I believe, I think it was right after or right before DrupalCon Nashville, Dries put out this video. So Dries put out this video of Layout Builder and how it works. This is the Umami installation profile. And what you're looking at here is Dries, or whoever made this video, using Layout Builder on a node basis. So this is what we're going to get into, but this is called the overrides section storage. And this allows you to build a layout of the page on a per entity basis. You can also, and we'll get into, build a layout per bundle. So you can have a default layout and a set layout. If you saw Adam's talk earlier, he was using the default section storage on a node type when he was demonstrating his media bundles. So you have the ability to add a block, add a section. A section in Layout Builder is a row, and you can have sections that have multiple columns. You have this view here with the off-screen dialog that allows you to select your blocks and settings within that. There's a lot of magic that happens behind the scenes with how certain blocks are available in this list and how they're inserted into the page. But this video pretty much gives you the high-level understanding of what Layout Builder actually is and what it does, which is it's a very robust and simple page-building tool that Drupal has.
And accessible.
That has been long desired in core. So we don't need to watch any more examples. We can move on. And this messes up my slide, but fixes over here. Cool. So Layout Builder at a high level, I just talked through some of this. So Layout Builder uses the Plugin API for majority of its functionality. Pretty much every component that is the underneath of Layout Builder uses the Plugin API. And Layout Builder itself uses the Layout API, which is provided by Core, and it's also enhanced by the Layout Discovery module. The Block API is used for what Layout calls inline blocks. These blocks are blocks that you can place on pages, but they're not reusable through the block manager in the admin panel. Now, I say that, but you can actually layout, the block admin page in the admin panel, and you can use them in Layout Builder. It goes one direction, not the other. And the way I approach how I look at Layout Builder in like a data model is a page can have many layouts, rows, or what Drupal calls layouts in the code is sections. A layout can have many blocks, and then a block can have many fields. If it's a block content, so it's a block entity, can have many fields, or if it's a block plugin, it can have many settings, which is called configuration in code. So I touched upon in the video what about layout storage. So at its heart, layout stores its layout settings, or like which section is in the middle of the page and what blocks are in the page. It's a serialized blob of data that is stored into the database on the field level on a node. So like, what does that mean? That means that if you have like a text field, for instance, that has a field on a node entity, Layout Builder will programmatically add a layout field that is a blob data type in the database, and it's a serialized string of data. So your plugins in Drupal can be serialized. That can be serialized into text, and that text can be stored into the database. There are some pros and cons with this approach, but I don't know all the ins and outs of why that decision was made.
Why are you looking at me?
I don't know. You said you worked on it, but it was made. So, like I said earlier, there's two types of layout section storage.
I did not make this up.
There is default section storage, which, like I said, is the section storage that is used if you want to set a layout on the entity bundle through the entity view mode settings. So, just like you would select which fields go into the entity view through the admin panel on the entity bundle, if you were to select a default layout, that would go to the default section storage. Now, if you want to have content editors or yourself be able to build pages using layouts on an entity basis, so on a per node basis, you're going to use the override section storage. On the admin panel, that needs to be explicitly enabled. And as I said, Layout Builder uses plugins, the plugin API for pretty much everything. Layout section storages are plugins, so you can actually define your own section storage if you wanted to, programmatically defining a section storage plugin. Cool. So we touched upon this. So the default section storage used for the entity view configuration. This layout will, this layout configuration, when you make this in the admin panel, will be exported to configuration. The override section storage, however, will not. That's going to exist in the database on the field level like we talked about, and again, must be explicitly enabled. Before I started the recording here, I did warn everybody there's going to be a lot of information here. So before I keep going, is there any questions about the section storage and how Layout Builder differentiates which one to use? Awesome. And it's going to keep doing that. So just a high level of what the plugin API is. So the plugin API in Drupal 8 has replaced the info hooks that we all loved in Drupal 7 and lower. So good example is hook block info that was used in Drupal 7, Drupal 6. Blocks are now defined in a plugin. And I'll have an example of that soon. Some advantages that Drupal.org likes to tout about plugins is that it can be easily swapped out with other plugins in an object-oriented way. One of the advantages that I see is that plugins are easily testable. So using the testing suite of unit, kernel, functional tests that come with Drupal, blocks can be just easily tested as a plugin compared to when they were defined in info hooks. And with plugins, you can either define them using an annotation, and the annotation itself is a self-documenting metadata of the plugin. Annotations are defined in a doc block at the top of a class definition. And we're going to get into, neat, how do you know to use an annotation or when to use a YAML file? Because you can also define plugins as a YAML file. An example of that is if you ever registered a library in Drupal, the library API uses the plugin API. And if you define a new library, you're defining it through a YAML file. If you want to register a new block, you're defining it through an annotation. So here's a plugin API annotation example. Here I've created my own custom block. And you're going to notice some things that you maybe not see in Drupal core or you don't see in other contrib modules is I'm using strict types on line 3. This is I guess a pattern, or it's a method that PHP 7 has allowed us to stop type coercion. So if I pass a string as an integer and my method is expecting an integer, I will get a fatal error for a type mismatch. This allows you to write safer code. And as a senior, I promote this with my junior developers, is to write safe code so we don't end up having bugs in production. This is another way of also self-documenting code, just like annotations are. So I'm going to define my block plugin in the plugin block namespace of my module. And you can see on lines 9 through 16 is my class doc block. On line 10, it doesn't matter. Drupal loves to force documentation, maybe where it doesn't need to be. Some, I don't know, extraneous metadata. But either way, the code sniffer likes it, so we put it. On lines 12 to 15 is our block annotation. And you're going to look at this if you've never made a block before and you're like, Nate, how do I make a block? And what fields in my annotation does my block require? And like we'll get into that in a couple slides, but either way you can look on Drupal.org or you can dive into some core code like we're going to do in a couple slides from now and look at the block manager that tells us what fields we may be required. And then my class, my block, is extending block base. Block base is a class provided by Drupal core, and this gives all the functionality that my block plugin would need. And the only required method that I need to build a block is the build method. And here I'm just outputting a renderable markup that says hello world. And then here's just the path of where I would stick that. Here's an example of a YAML definition. I talked about the libraries API being a YAML plugin, but this is also how you would register a layout with YAML. And this is just yanked out of the layout discovery module that is provided by Drupal core. So I don't know why it scrolled all the way down. So this is the block plugin manager. So every plugin itself that's in core has a manager that manages that plugin. And the manager itself provides all the information that you need to know, is it an annotation or is it a YAML file? You might find this on Drupal.org, you might not. So if you're like, hey, I'm trying to work with a plugin and I don't actually understand how to interact with it, always know that there's a manager associated with that plugin. It's going to tell you what you need to do. So I have extracted some code here to make this example smaller, so the dots will denote that, because this is a very beefy class. But here's our constructor. So any plugin manager that extends the default plugin manager, which is a class provided by Drupal core, most of what's happening in a plugin will happen in the constructor. And the parents constructor method is what gives us all this metadata between line 34 and 40. So on line 35, this is the namespace in which our plugin is going to be registered at. So you see plugin/block. If you saw in our previous example, I've defined my custom block in source plugin block. The annotation discovery service that is in Drupal will look in that directory for files, and then inside those files will look for the annotation definition. Line 36 is a traversable object of namespaces. These are the namespaces provided by Composer, the package manager, and autoloader that Drupal uses. Module handler is the module handler service. Line 38 is the block plugin interface, and this is what the block plugins themselves will be inheriting. So the block plugin manager and the plugin manager that the block plugin manager inherits from, I just said the same word a bunch of times, it's going to be looking for classes with that interface, that inherit that interface. And lastly, on line 39, you'll see that this block class is namespace and an annotation namespace. This is a class that defines properties of what the annotation expects. So that's the ID field, the admin label for blocks. Could be like context, which is like a route context or something like that. But on a high level, this is how the block manager works, and this is how majority of blocks in Drupal core work. Again, I know a lot of information to digest. There's a ton of information on Drupal.org. The plugin API and the plugin managers are highly documented. It's a great documentation.
But in
there.
general, if the constructor says annotate in there, you know you're using the annotations and the...
Essentially, yes. So I'm going to actually get into the layout manager, which makes things a lot more complicated. So the layout manager actually allows you to define layouts through a YAML file, like you saw in the example, and through annotation. And I can tell you that by if you're looking at the constructor method on the layout plugin manager class, I can see that it's looking for the plugin layout namespace. Again, we have the traversable object and namespaces, module handler. This is a magic constant, class is a magic constant in PHP that will give you a fully namespace string of that class. Again, we're looking on line 32 for objects that are implementing layout interface, and then line 33 is the annotation class for layout, and that will have all the information you need to know what fields are required to register a layout. What's different in the Layout Plugin Manager, however, is the overridden get discovery method. I'm not going to go through here, but the two things to note on line 56 and line 62 is that the layout discovery, the get discovery method in the Layout Plugin Manager is defining an annotated class discovery object and a YAML discovery decorator object. So we know that this plugin manager is looking for a YAML file and it's looking for a class annotation. I warned you guys at the beginning, you may glaze over. I'm sorry, it's a lot of information I'm going to take in. But again, high-level discussions of how the plugin API works is this how it pretty much works across Drupal core and contributed modules, and this is how the layout builder system works as well, and how different sources of data are gathered to build layout builder. So now we're looking at some code. Before I get in there, does anybody have any questions about what we just covered? No questions are probably not good. So perfect. So I have a example site here, and hopefully it will get a little easier. So I've used Drush to spin up this site. I'm running Lando locally here, so shout out to the team that builds Lando. I have a pre-configured content type here called layout page. Layout page is enabled with the override section storage for Layout Builder, so I will be building a page on a per entity basis. So annoying. I don't normally use a MacBook, so I apologize for that dictionary thing popping up. Like, it's ooh, that's a basic page. Layout page. Cool. So here's my test page. You see there's nothing on it. And you saw how simple my content type is. It's just a title. Because when you use layout, pretty much all the fields on your nodes themselves are just going to be metadata, like used, or maybe like SEO, or maybe probably just SEO. So out of the box, I'm with Layout Builder. I'm getting this like placeholder for links field. This call to action here to delete the section. It's going to pop out again the off-screen dialog. Fun fact about the off-screen dialog, if you actually don't know what it is, it's powered by the jQuery UI dialog component. I didn't know that until like probably a year ago. And a lot of things that are magic in Drupal, I guess at first, then you realize how simple they are actually underneath. So anyway, a little tidbit. Cool, so I just deleted the section, and let's just add a section. So this is the default Layout Builder experience. These are with Layout Builder, you get 4 different layouts, 1 through 4 columns. I'm going to add one here, and then I'm going to add a block. And the purpose really of why I created this talk is I built a site with Layout Builder earlier this year, and I was really excited to use it. And then after I turned it on, I was like, okay, look at all of this. And it's like, I'm going to turn this over to a content editor, and their brains are going to explode. So I was like, okay, so what do I need to do to improve this experience? And then I realized when I was doing this back in March, I was like, okay, Layout Builder's 1, not even stable in core yet. I was building this site using like the beta releases of 8.7, because I knew by the time the site was going to launch, 8.7 is going to be stable. And the only contrib module that was out was like, I think the blacklist module that like Lullabot created. For the purpose of filtering these blocks. And then I was thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, I'm going to install this module, and then 6 months from now, it's probably going to be obsolete, and because someone else is going to come with a more robust solution, and Lightning 4.0 has a bunch of things to improve the Layout Builder experience, and I was like, I'm just not going to do that. I'm going to create my own system, and then I realized it was like a couple hooks, and I was done. So walk out of this thinking like, hey, I may not need 7 contrib modules. Maybe I just need my own custom module that does exactly what I need to do. Might not be the Drupal way, but it might be the Drupal 8 way. So another thing that is kind of annoying to me is if I want to add the powered by Drupal block here, which is the one that's in the footer, Layout Builder forces me to put a block title on every block, no matter if it's displayed or not, and it's a required field. And one thing when I built the site that I built with Layout Builder, I got back from the content editor is like, why is there a title here? Why do I need to forcibly put a title? Because if I'm building flexible content, not everything needs a title. So I'm going to show you how to disable that in a pretty elegant way. I think it's elegant because I made it. But anyway, so let's add this here. And yep, this is pretty much your default layout experience. And shout out to the Bartik theme because, I don't know, maybe next year we won't have Bartik anymore. Cool. So I'm going to enable my module here. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
Okay. The path is so long in my terminal, like I didn't want to make the text even bigger, so I really apologize if it's too small, but then it'll look cramped. Cool. So I just enabled my module. My module is called Layout Builder Examples. This is available on my GitHub page, so afterwards, if you want to refer to this, you can actually go to my GitHub page at github.com/NathanDentzau, or if you want to go to the session page at netcamp.org, there's a link to it there. Probably the easier way. So let's just look at the code really quick. So this is my Layout Builder module. We can see the structure of the module. Super simple. I've got an info file here. Got a module file. See, strict types has creeped back into this demo. And you might see some things that maybe you're not used to that are PHP 7 related, and Core has still yet to adopt, which is the void return type, which just means like my method, my function doesn't return anything. It serves really no purpose other than self-documenting code. And if you're using strict types, and if you have that enabled, and you wrote code now, and 2 months from now, another developer goes in and decides to return something from that method, it's going to fatal, and maybe you're going to force them to write a test for it. I don't know. Big picture nerdiness. So anyway, to solve the problem that I pointed out with all of those blocks available in Layout Builder, you can implement a hook called hook plugin filter type consumer alter. All right, what does that do? It's a lot. This is a hook that's available in the Plugin API. This allows me to filter the plugin type by ID, its machine name. So in this case, it's block. And then the consumer itself is the Layout Builder module. And the reason why I'm doing this and using this hook as a type in a consumer is without specifying the consumer, and I just filter the type, I also filter the blocks that are in the admin panel. And I don't want to do that. So I want to define what the consumer is, so I'm only filtering the blocks in Layout Builder. This right here, the only argument in this plugin is an array of definitions. These are plugin definitions. And then what I'm doing here on line 15 is I'm running the PHP array filter function. The array filter function is also using on line 28. You can see the array filter use key option. And what this is going to do is just pass a string of plugin IDs, which is in the definitions. The keys are the plugin IDs, and the values are a definition object for a plugin. Then what I'm doing here, and this is a couple iterations, but you'll see there's 2 different ways to filter plugins, is my allowed plugin IDs array. So what's going to happen is I have the ability to define a regular expression that says, only allow these plugin IDs that match this pattern. I iterate through that. And then I return either true if it matches and false if it doesn't. If it returns true, array filter, it's going to keep that definition in the array. And if I return false, it's going to remove that definition. Lastly, you're going to see, or you can see here, is after that I discovered, well, hey, I want views blocks, but views blocks are important. But who the hell wants to use the who's online block? So I was like, okay, so I have to explicitly ignore certain views blocks because they're not valuable to my content editors. Because then you're just going to start getting questions like, do I use this? Like, why is it here? So I'm doing a final pass, which is just iterating through that list and using the unset PHP function to remove that from the array. And because we've passed definitions by reference using this ampersand here, anything I do to adjust the definitions array is going to alter that array within Drupal. So yeah, let's look at the add block list now. And now the only block I have available here now is my recent comments block. And there's a couple contrib modules that do this. I believe certain distributions do this as well. But I just did that in a single hook. And hey, it might be faster if your client's worried about performance. So, or if you don't want to write code, use the contrib module. I can hurt my feelings. Any questions with that?
That was cool.
Shane?
I'm assuming yes, but you could just disable those views, right, when they're shown up?
Yeah, you could disable those views. So the question was, could you disable the views versus writing that? Yes, you could. I think there's like multiple ways to like approach a problem. Like I personally approach it through code, but
And then if it ever got enabled later, you wouldn't have to worry about it showing up. So.
yep, exactly. Mike?
With your basic plugins, it's doing it for everything that's used in Layout Builder, right? So
Yes.
if you wanted to change what was available, say, per content type,
You could actually do that by putting like a guard clause at the top of that hook by using the route match service and just filtering by content type. Yeah, that's a great question. Cool. So I have another example here. Guys, like this demo's going so well. Like we haven't had smash glass in a Tesla vehicle yet, so I'm super excited. I don't even care. Like I don't even care if I jinxed it. The first example worked so well.
You're more than halfway through.
Yeah, we're not though. That was 1/6 of the examples. You guys are in for the long haul. We could be here till 7 for the. All right. So this example, I'm going to show how to filter the layouts that are available. So the layout API itself provides the ability to define what a layout is, and the layout plugins. The layout discovery module extends that functionality. It also provides its own layouts, and then the layout builder module shuts off all the modules from the layouts, all the layouts from the layout discovery module, and then turns on their own layouts. And then I'm going to shut off those layouts and turn on my own. So this is how you do it. So as you can see, I have no layouts here. And I'm doing that by using the same exact hook for blocks, except I'm just changing the plugin type to layout. And I'm using basically the same exact principle, is that I'm using the array filter function, and I'm using a regular expression, and I'm saying any layout that starts with layout builder examples as the plugin ID, keep that in the definitions. If not, discard it, and I don't want my content editors to use that. The advantages of why I'm doing this is you'll see when I define my own layout plugins, I'm essentially going to enable a framework for my content editors to make a super flexible experience for building pages. And I can do that by defining what the background color is, the background image, column widths, stuff like that. If you can code it, you can do it, essentially, with Layout Builder. Any questions with this type of example? All right. I need to drink some water. All right, so remember I talked about that block title that was super annoying to my content editors? Just like Apple, where they have an app for that, I have a solution, or I have a hook for that, as they may say. I guess this might not be the most elegant way, but let me actually run through the example here. So I'm going to add another block, and I want to say, let's add the list comments. Oh, this is not a good example. All right, I take back that comment. All right, I'm just going to comment this line out real quick. And let's get our blocks back. And this is the Powered by Drupal block. And look at, my title field's gone. Because like, who needs a title for that block? And the way I'm doing that is through a fairly simple hook form alter hook. And again, it might not or might be elegant. So there's two fields that we have to worry about with the title. We have to worry about the label field in the layout builder form, and we have to worry about the label display field. I'm turning those both into hidden elements, and then I'm filling in that title field with just a generated UUID, because every single time you go to this form, it's going to be unique, and we don't really care about what the value is. And then I'm making sure that the label display's default value is always false, which means that the block title will never display. And just that one hook now enhances your content editor's experience and maybe stops the questions of why do I have to enter in a title. So yeah, any questions with that?
What if you want a title?
Then don't use it. I know, I will say. No, right, so this is what I do, right? So I don't want a title for like maybe 3 out of the 5 times that I have blocks or blocks that need to be inserted. So if I need a title for certain blocks, then I just explicitly add a custom title field or like add a custom like title setting.
Disable this one globally and then add a field for the custom.
Yeah, I mean you could also add more logic into here. Again, it's Drupal. We know there's so many ways to do like a single purpose, or like have a single solution. This is just what's worked for me on a couple different projects, and I don't know, sharing the wealth of knowledge. Cool. So I have another example here. Ooh, let's stash that. So this is defining custom layouts through plugins. And I'm going to show you how to define a layout with a YAML file. I'm going to show you how to define a layout with a plugin annotation. So let's just go to our front end here. We'll see if I add a section. I've now got two new layouts. They may look exactly the same as the one provided by Drupal core, but they are not. So let's open up our file explorer here. And we can see that I now have a layouts directory. I now have a source directory, and I have a layouts.yaml file here. So if you are not strong in object-oriented programming, as a Drupal developer, it is only your benefit to get stronger. And the reason why I say that is modules like layout, modules like media, who are two of the new Drupal core modules that are available, are complicated for a reason that they provide a lot of functionality, but they follow best practices of object-oriented programming. So be able to confidently and intelligently interact with them, you just need to know certain principles. So when I work with Layout Builder and I'm building custom layouts for my clients, I'm always approaching this where I define what my components are, I define on what type of layouts I need, and then I just say, okay, what functionality do I need to give to my content editor to give them as much power as possible to build a page without my intervention? Because that's, in my opinion, the point of Layout Builder. Empower your content editors so they don't have to come back to me to say, hey, Nate, make this text change. Because I don't want to get paid to make the text change, I want to get paid to write code. So this is the way I approach it. So I have an abstract class here called example layout base. It extends the layout default class, which is the default layout plugin class provided by Drupal core. And I only offer 2 layouts in this example, but you can add as many as you want. And when I build my layouts, they always extend the same layout class so they can have the same options. So this layout base will always provide, no matter what the layout type is, a background image, a background color, and the option for a content editor to adjust the width. And the layout default class has a method that we can override called default configuration to provide default configuration. We have the option to define the build configuration form method, which is actually the form in Layout Builder that you get to configure the layout. We're using the form API here, just plain old PHP arrays. We have the validate configuration form method here, which is we just stub out because I don't need to validate anything specifically. And then I just have my submit configuration form, which is going to set the form values to the configuration property within Layout Builder. And if you don't really understand like what's happening here, like you can just go back and look at the layout default class and figure out what you need to do to kind of, connect the dots. Just like that build method in the block plugin we talked about a couple slides ago, the layout plugin also has a build method, and this is where you're going to basically define your build render array. And here I'm applying a class. I'm also applying inline styles, and if a background image is defined and a background color, the background image is going to take priority. I'm probably not doing some best practices here, like using the load facade method, and using inline background images, but that's for another day. I have 2 abstract methods here, and I'm using polymorphism in my layout base class, and that is for the get default width method and get default width. So my concrete implementations for my layout class will use these 2 methods. These 2 methods are used up in my configuration form for my width select element. The get widths method will return the available widths as an option, and then the get default width will return the default value for that layout. So if we look at the one column layout, you'll see that my one column layout will offer background images, will offer background color, will offer background widths, but the concrete class is only the two methods. I only care about what is my default width and what widths have an option. Super simple, and this type of programming and this pattern that I've established for my layouts is easily scalable if you want to just keep adding different layout types afterwards. You're not hard coding the different options and the different layout options. You can see on line 10, I've defined this layout in layouts.yaml. So let's keep that open and we can look at layouts.yaml. We can see that layout builder examples, that one column. Some of the values of this plugin are class. I'm explicitly defining where my class is. I have a label, I have a path to where my layouts is, so layouts in one column. We can see here in the directory, it's layouts one column. I define what the template name is. Layout Builder is extremely customizable. I have not run into a case where like I can't alter or customize something exactly to my needs. And I think that speaks volumes for like comparing like my experience with paragraphs where like, so I've gotten to certain situations with paragraphs where it's just like I don't understand what's happening because there's so much going on with the entity revisions that this is just way more straightforward with me if it's just plugins. The entity system is extremely complicated. The plugin system to me is just straightforward. Any questions so far about this? Mike?
So with the custom layout you're defining here, you write a plugin class,
Yep.
right, which tells me then, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you can't define custom layouts at just a theme level?
You can define custom layouts in a theme file because there's actually...
I don't know. I would not bet on it, but I haven't tried
But
it.
you can't do plugins.
You actually can.
In the YAML file you
but
can.
It is not recommended.
Yeah, it is bizarre because you can't have a source directory in your theme file, which was actually misleading to me at one point.
It does technically work, but it's not recommended. It's a bad idea.
The source directory actually works.
Yeah, we tried it. Again, mad science don't do it, but we tried it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're going to get to the mad science section at the end here, which is I don't recommend doing.
I
But
truly thought we were already in mad science.
sorry. Yes. Keith.
Hi, I'm just curious. Have you ever think about like drag and drop for the layout builders? Like,
So it actually already has drag and drop.
oh, it has.
Yeah. So I'll demo that super quick.
We saw that in the video.
We did actually. Yeah, the video had drag and drop, but I can actually just add these real quick. I know it's the same block, not exciting, but you can actually drag and drop, and you can drag between sections too. Yeah. So like Layout Builder pretty much does. There's improvements to the UI that need to be made. Like there's like this bug where like the add block links are off-centered, but I don't know. That's not this talk. We're talking about hacking it.
You can also move them around with the keyboard.
Can you really? I'm horrible at the keyboard.
It's accessible.
I actually, yeah, they talked about that at DrupalCon. Shane.
Well, one other quick comment on the, when I first started using Layout Builder, I hated how the form was so narrow. You can actually drag on the top and expand that sidebar form out.
I'm going to actually break that and put everything into modals at the end, so, yeah.
You can use modals as well, but if you didn't know that you can make that form bigger by dragging it, it's not intuitive unless you go
Yeah.
to the very top corner and then you can drag it. So,
I didn't know
It's
that.
a great.
All right, I'm going to take,
That's
I'm going to take one more question so I can keep going because I have a couple more examples. Go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned like the category of layouts. And
Yeah.
Is there any way? I'm wondering, is there any way to group them in the UI?
They are grouped by module, I believe.
Okay. But not.
You could also alter that list and probably output it the way you want to. And there's an example of that because like I'm overriding that in my last example with modals, and you can alter that list to make it whatever you want, essentially.
Okay.
We'll get there. I'll show you. So really quick, because we're running out of time, this two-column layout is defined as a layout annotation. So if you see if I can split this real quick. Hey, let's close that. You can see if you can see that, you can see that they're basically the same exact things, except like my ID definition that's in the annotation is actually on line 1 in the YAML file, and class is implied in my annotation because you're already in the class file. But label, path, so on and so forth, they're exactly the same. There's just different syntax. So pretty cool. Not every plugin does this, but I like that layout gives you the option as a developer. Pros and cons either way. As like a pro, using the annotations is that everything's in one class and your class is self-documented. The con is that annotations are kind of ugly to look at in a doc block, so you might want to go with the YAML. Either way, it's what it is. All right, next example. We're only on number 4. This is cool because I have 2 more, so let's do this quick. I want to blow through this example. This is defining a custom block. So again, just like my layout base class, I'm using a layout block class that extends the block class itself, the block base class. And I'm only giving the option for background colors. Sites I've built, I've done widths for blocks, I've done positioning, I've done like animation effects of like the block loading on the page. If it, you can choose if you want it to fade in, slide in, or if you want like a lazy load where you scroll and all of a sudden it just appears. Drupal is, very customizable in that sense. I've hard-coded some options here. And again, in the build method, I have some background colors that you can choose from. Now that I've enabled that, let's just build a section with one of these. So we have a 2-column 50/50. Let's choose a background color of purple. I have to clear my Drupal cache. No one reminded me to clear my cache.
We're all thinking that.
It's because you didn't refresh the browser and it didn't work.
Yeah. So I have a couple different blocks here. Let's use the accordion block that I built. And let's actually give the accordion a red background. This title field, hey, we talked about titles. Matt asked the question about titles. This is an explicit title field on my accordion block that I added because it's useful because accordions need a title. So now I can save the layout, and now I can have my background color of purple on the section, and the red is the block. Not a front-end developer. I am not a designer. This is what you are getting in this example.
Theme that layout.
But I can tell you I have built sites that look better than this. So any questions with that? I guess pretty straightforward from the layout one. Yeah. So Adam thought we were in the mad scientist territory. This is mad scientist territory. Yes. So I'm doing it. I greatly dislike the off-screen dialogue for Layout Builder on text blocks because I do not have enough room for my content editors to enter in all this data. It's nice that CK Editor has that plugin that allows you to go full screen. It's also just kind of janky too sometimes. There are major caveats with this. One, I've hacked a lot of Layout Builder functionality, but I have not hacked core. I have extended classes in an object-oriented way. So that is the number one. Number two is that in CK Editor, when you open up an option like Entity Embed or the Media Library, it opens up a modal, and it shares the same ID as the Layout Builder modal does, because everything is pound Drupal-modal. So it doesn't work in all cases. So if you're not doing Entity Embed or using the modals in CK Editor, hack away. That is what I'm going to say about that. So let's just look at the code that's involved. So you will see that my module here has added 3 new hooks. And I don't even really know how to explain this other than saying, this is what I did, and just go back and look at what I did. Because this took me days to figure out to do this example. And I've made mistakes along the way, and I was fixing them until last night because I realized that some of them weren't working. But here we are. It fully works. And maybe you will be inspired to improve the UI of Layout Builder. So I'm using hook field widget ID form alter. As I said, on a layout overrides page, when you're overriding the layout itself, the node itself is a field. So we actually need to override the widget to say, switch the type out to my custom element type. You can see here that I have a custom element type that I'm overriding, which is the layout builder element. I'm overriding 2 methods here to say, hey, get rid of the off-screen dialog and give me a modal. As you see here, I have all this code here to just make sure that the block links open modals. Go back to the module file. I have a layout builder examples contextual links alter. This alters the contextual links in layout builder that show up right here. There are a ton of links in layout builder I learned after doing this. And then there's a bunch of controllers we have to override. And I've simplified this by using a pattern layout builder already uses, which is a rebuild trait. And it just uses these 2 methods, rebuild and close and rebuild layout. And what this does is every time you save a form in layout builder, it runs these AJAX commands so the page refreshes without actually refreshing, and it inserts my modal layout builder into the page. Let's see here. I've overridden all these forms. These are all the forms that are used in layout builder. And again, I'm just using my traits. It's pretty simple. You just need to override all these. And then you're like, oh, hey, Nate, so you defined all these classes. How do you actually override them? Well, I'm overriding the routes, and I'm using what is provided by Drupal called the route subscriber base. And these are all the routes that I have to override. So we have a mix of controller definitions and form definitions that we have to override. But once you spent the days that I did figuring this out to override this, there you go. You have all those classes. And it actually is a lot easier to do this than you think, because like when I approached this, I was like, I'm just going to figure it out one by one. But what I should have just done is go to the layout builder module and look at the routes.yaml file and realize I just need to override every single definition in there. I told you guys it's advanced. So let's just run through here so you can see what I did. So before that was an off-screen dialog. This is now a modal. I can select 2 column. And I can add a new modal here. I can add a block. Again, this is now a modal. I will let you know that this looks really great in Bartik. In a custom theme, which most of us use for clients, this is going to look horrendous. So just think about this as when you make these types of customizations, you're putting extra work on your front-end developers. I'm going to give a shout out to Kathy. She did a project with RISD, and I did a little bit of collaboration with that on her. On that project, and Kathy did an amazing job adding custom styles to RISD, so their content editors actually had an amazing experience, but just be forewarned. And then in here, I've actually defined what the width is, and like, look at this width. Look how much room we have to use the text editor. And then I can add the block, and the block actually adds into the page, and I get the correct thing, and I can configure the section, and it opens up in a modal, and I can delete the section, and it opens up in a modal, and yep, that is it. That's how I hacked Layout Builder pretty much. But
And the alternate to this is you click in the upper left and expand out, like what Shane was saying?
absolutely, yep, that's the alternate, yeah. Or you can actually you can honestly just override the styles of Layout Builder and just like force the width of the off-screen dialog to be like 50%. By default. That's what I've actually done on client sites. I have not done this. Yeah. I went down this rabbit hole earlier in the year, and I ran into the entity embed CK editor modal issue, and I was like, this is just not something I want to go down. It's a systemic problem within Drupal with modals that needs to get fixed, where each modal needs to have a unique ID, and it just doesn't. So long as that problem is fixed, then you could easily use modals, which I'm assuming was the driving factor of using the off-screen dialog.
You used Layout Builder modal contrib module pretty successfully.
Yes, but we had talked about that, Kathy, which was
I'm not doing
the entity embed. Yeah, and
that's a big thing.
I went down this road. I had it all done on a client site, and then they were like, "Hey, let's use entity embed." Boom, done. I was like, "Let me just delete all that code and go back to the off-screen dialog." Shane, you had a question?
I was just going to say that there's a layout builder modal module, but I think it might still have the entity embed.
Yeah. Again, I prefaced it at the beginning. Everything I've done here, there's a contrib module for, but I feel like I want you to leave this session being like, shit, that's how you do it. Yeah. So yeah, any other questions? Cool. Did everybody learn something?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Everybody feel a little overwhelmed.
No. Yeah. Good.
I know there's
Yep.
a million ways to do everything.
Yeah.
One way I was thinking you could maybe use the, not rather than just, metadata, I guess, on the node, like the node type itself on the entity type, would be to be able to define sort of that middle layer of like, here are 3 different variations for this particular content type, so that when you're designing and your content editors are picking different layouts, those layouts still fit to an overall sort of combination of components design. So instead of, because I feel like there's the per content type and then there's the per node, but something in between that can define a set of nodes and be able to be updated if your theme were refreshed or something like that.
That's
I just can't think of where else you would control that.
It's an interesting point because
Can you repeat the question for the recording?
I don't even remember what the question
Yeah, I
was.
don't even know if that was making sense.
Yeah, I think the question was like, is there like an intermediary way of putting like multiple default layouts
Yeah, because
on a content type?
I could just imagine that people get really carried away getting in that road, like, I'm just building this unique page, but then later on somebody with a little, maybe there's like an audit done and a design audit, and they're like, well, actually I think you would, let's try to wrap all these in a different kind of structure, and these in a different kind of structure.
Few modes.
You need to, like, the way I approach Layout Builder, honestly, is like components like React does.
Okay.
So my blocks are my components. My section is a component. And I build Layout Builder in a module, and I don't make it theme specific. So I can go back to my client and be like, if you want a new theme in a year, you can get a new theme in a year. I don't have to hard code or redo everything. We just need to rewrite the style sheets. Because I think about approaching it like Drupal core does, which is you're building a product, and you're building a solution that it can be like agnostic to the theme. And I fell short of that as a Drupal developer when I had first started building Drupal sites, which is like I'm building at the scope and I don't think about like the solution. And I feel like Layout Builder really sets up a framework for you to think about, I'm going to approach this in a component way, and I'm going to build this that's not specific to the scope of my project, but it's specific to the components that are available to the design. And if you have a redesign where certain components aren't available anymore, just hide the blocks.
Yeah.
Or if you have a section that's not available anymore, create a new content type. Filter the available layouts of the available blocks per content type. So you could have like a landing page, e-com landing page, marketing landing page, and they all have different layouts and they all have different blocks available. And there's a contrib module, I think Layout Builder Restrictions, that does that very well, where you can use both blocks and layouts to restrict that. And I think you can do it by content type. Are you familiar with that, Adam?
Correct.
Yeah.
Lightning uses that to do the restrictions.
Yeah.
That's how we hide it.
So, I mean, again, this is the low level of like how these components work and the understanding. Because as like a software engineer, I want to know how things work. I just don't want to know why I need to use them. So, I don't know. That somewhat help?
It's
Yeah.
just somewhere in between.
Yeah. Definitely a good point. Any other questions? Or are we ready to go get our free drinks at the after party?
Beer o'clock.
Cool. Yeah.